Die erste Elegie. Wer, wenn ich schrie, hörte mich denn aus der Engelordnungen und Gesetz selbst, es nehme einer mich plötzlich ans Herz, ich verginge von seinem stärkeren Dasein. Denn das Schöne ist nichts als das schrecklichen Anfang, den wir noch gerade ertragen, und wir bewundern es so, weil es gelassen verschmäht, uns zu zerstören. Ein jeder Engel ist schrecklich.
Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angels' hierarchies? And even if one of them pressed me suddenly against his heart, I would be consumed in that overwhelming existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we still are just able to endure, and we are so awed because it serenely disdains to annihilate us. Every angel is terrifying.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Regeneration Podcast. And you notice we start off a little differently this time. I hope you didn't think, oh, they switched to German.
Well, Michael, we started with Name That Tune sometimes. It could have been a version of German Name That Tune, right?
We could have. But I asked our guests today, two guests. So it's another thing, out of the ordinary for us. Daniel Polikoff, poet, translator, and Rilke scholar, and my godson, Jonathan Geltner, also author of most recently of Absolute Music, which actually has a section on one of our topics today, and translator of Paul Claudel's 5 Great Odes for Angelical Press not too long ago. And welcome to the Regeneration broadcast, gentlemen.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, part of what we're going to talk, not just Rilke today, but Rilke is important in the initial inspiration to talk about this, because I mentioned to Mike weeks ago, we should do a show on Wings of Desire.
I hadn't watched it till yesterday. You know, I was familiar with it, had seen parts.
And here's the thing. Now, this is the 35th anniversary of, I think, the release of the film in the United States, though it was released in 1987 in Germany, I think, or elsewhere. And I know this because I saw it when it was released in the theater. In fact, you couldn't find theaters that had this. This was only in the art house circuit, which those of you people raised on Netflix have no idea what I'm talking about. But I saw it in 1988 in the summer at the Detroit Film Theater, which is a really beautiful little theater that housed the Detroit Institute of Arts. And this is right after, so in December of 87 is when I left the music business because it just was gross. And so I was kind of in this deep period of spiritual seeking and striving. And I realized when I look back that I was always wearing black and gray, which is I had my German existentialist vibes happening. And I was a vegetarian. I didn't drink coffee anymore. I was just really renouncing everything. And then I went to see this film.
How old were you, Michael?
I was 25, maybe 26. I think I just turned 26. And I went to see this film with my girlfriend. And there's the scene in the film, we'll talk about it later, where the first thing Damiel the angel does when he incarnates is gets a cup of coffee. Because Peter Falk's talking to him earlier. I just wish you could taste this. It's so good when you get coffee and you smoke at the same time. It's fantastic. That's the first thing I did when I went home. I'm tearing the house up looking for coffee, and I haven't stopped since. Yeah. Anyway, so but besides that, it was profoundly moving. I mean, I had never seen anything like this film, And as when I became an English professor many years later, I was doing a course called Religion and Film, and this is one of the films we would do. And one of my colleagues, a philosopher, said, "I got to come see this." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Because if you see that movie and it doesn't change your life, you're probably dead." And so he came, and he had seen it, but he had a similar experience. And it was nice to see that translate to some of my students. One times I showed the film in class. Afterwards, I was getting ready to leave. It was late afternoon class, and I'm going through the parking lot, and I saw this young woman, and she had just watched the film with me, and she was just in a kind of state. I said, "Cameron, you okay?" She said, "I just realized I have a lot of things to think about." Yeah. So I would ask you gentlemen, what was your initial experience of this film? Daniel?
Yeah. Well, it was a very important film for me. Some kind of biographical parallel. I was in graduate school in comparative literature at Cornell, but I had gone through a period of crisis, of profound alienation from the university, and my dissertation wasn't happening, and I had recently been divorced, and I saw it around the same time that I was had met my current wife, Monica, who is German. And it was part of a whole period for me, of really kind of trying to find a new footing in life. One of the reasons for the alienation from the university was because I felt the spirit of the letter was pretty dead in the academic circles there. It's the height of deconstruction, and everything was either French theory or politics, and such a profound distance between the community of critics and the living word. And I was just trying to start somehow from ground zero again and find my way through a broken relationship. And it spoke very deeply to that quest to try and find meaning from a very modern place of, I think you mentioned, wearing black and gray, Michael, existentialism. There's an existential character about the film, and I think a lot of Wender's stuff, and certainly Rilke as an early 20th century poet fits into that milieu of trying to extract from existence as it's presented to us some kind of meaning, some kind of identity in the face of a world that can seem very empty. And certainly for myself too, I saw it. I don't know if I think I saw it alone the first time I saw it, but then I saw it several times not long thereafter with Monica, and it became a little bit of a signature of what we were kind of trying to look for in each other, a relationship, love, spirit, some meaning. And I actually met Monica. She's a eurythmist, the movement art in the Waldorf School, at a eurythmy program that she was selling tickets for. And we got to ticket talking. So I was the first one to show up. And I was translating Rilke at that time. And it turned out that she had done her diploma on the sonnets to Orpheus. So we struck up a conversation about Rilke, and so which is formative in our whole of our relationship. So Rilke and Wenders kind of went together from the beginning for me, and I think they both have this point of departure from an early modern existentialist search for meaning in the soul, in which the relationship of man and woman, one way or another, I think in very different ways, is very formative. And where organized religion per se is not really very much on the scene at all. I don't think it's very present in Wings of Desire. There aren't scenes in churches or,
Right.
you know. So yeah, it was very, very important part of that formative phase in my life and career, which also began, was when I was first discovering Rilke at the same time.
Interesting. And John?
I'll have to ask you guys if what the direct connection is between Wenders and Rilke. I believe there is one for that film, right? But Peter Handke, the great Austrian author, is the man who wrote the Lied vom Kindsein, the poem that is recited throughout the Song of Childhood, about childhood, that's recited throughout the film. But to
answer that question quickly is, I think, if I'm correct, Wenders, when he was working on the film, was reading Rilke every night. He said he wanted contact with the best of the German language, and he found that in Rilke.
Okay.
So he was kind of immersed in Rilke while he was making that film. Is that your understanding, Michael?
Yeah, in fact, because I own the Criterion Collection version, which has a nice documentary. That's hits at the beginning of the film, of the documentary. He said he was invoking Rilke intentionally.
So that's great. I'm glad to know that, because I don't have the Criterion version of the film. I didn't see it in the theater. So I saw it for the first time in the spring of 2003, which is when I was either just I don't remember precisely when, either just turned or about to turn 21. So slightly younger than you guys, but there's some interesting parallels to your stories of it. And there's no doubt that's not a coincidence. So at that time, I was an undergraduate at the University of Cincinnati, and I was living by myself in this city, the middle of the city there. And I was painfully coming out of a disastrous ending of the first very serious relationship of my life. I had been engaged to get married and had called that off, and was in a great deal of heartbreak and confusion at that time because of that. And at the same time, and partly as a means of getting myself through that period when I seemed to have lost sight of everything that I thought I was committed to, I was throwing myself with every possible vigor and passion into my studies as a literature student. And I studied a number of languages, mostly Greek and Latin and French, but even a few others too as an undergraduate. And so one day, some depressing evening in the springtime, I went to the Blockbuster video, which you can remember those, that was by my campus. And I was just mindlessly walking around in it looking for something. And I hit upon it. I'd never heard of the movie. I had no idea what was going on with it. And I rented it and took it home and watched it. If by any chance anyone listening might have read my novel, I can. The film does have an important moment in the novel, but I will say my relationship to it is not quite as intense. as the narrator of that novel. But I did have a powerful reaction to it. And it so happened that in that same time, that same season, that springtime in Cincinnati, I was, and I don't remember how I first got into this. I was reading Rilke for the first time, and somehow at the same time also Stephen Mitchell. So the only translation I've ever had of Rilke is Stephen Mitchell's translation, and he was into Zen. And is he still living? I don't know. I think he is. Zen and Taoism. He has a really fantastic, though quite idiosyncratic translation of the Tao Te Ching, and I was reading that at the same time as his Rilke translations, and somehow, I mean, there must be something behind this because the same man elected to translate both, but somehow to me they were lining up, those two texts, the Duino elegies specifically and the Tao Te Ching. I can't now, I actually have like all these notes scribbled when I was 21 years old in my copy of Rilke's Duino elegies. And there's all kinds of references to Taoism in my notes. And I just don't understand how I was able to make those connections. I was actually a much better reader of these elegies, I think, at 21 than I might be now. But anyway, that was in there. And so it was this kind of powerful synchronicity going on there that was incredibly formative. And so these poems, if I reread them today, and I have since, of course, reread them at different times, very powerfully sort of yoke me back to that phase of my life. But as which includes Wings of Desire, Der Himmel über Berlin. And when I watched that movie for the first time, I was studying German. I didn't have very good German at the time, but I had it well enough that I could understand a lot of the German parts of it. I had fluent French. So one of the most amazing things about that film is that we get Marianne's thoughts in French. She's French, but of course she's in Berlin. So dialogue in any dialogue or external speech is in German. So the movie goes back and forth between these. And it's that oscillation between the two languages, one of which was very familiar to me, and one of which was a newer encounter for me, was really powerful too. And actually, I think a key element to how I experienced the film. It did have subtitles, of course, and I would probably, look at them sometimes. But I tried not to, and I generally have trouble with subtitles, and I can't really pay very good attention to them or read them quickly enough. And I was just arrested by the language of the film. So the writing, that the Lied von Kindsein that Peter Handke wrote for the movie was especially powerful to me. But just the very fact that you have these two languages coexisting there. And then, of course, English in the form of Nick Cave singing and the concert they go to, which and I knew who he was. I listened to his music some at that time. Maybe we could bring that in later. But the linguistic thing going on in the film was itself a powerful thing for me, and I've never really quite figured out why, except that I think it's beautifully written. In the novel, the narrator goes on about Marianne's Liebeserklärung, her declaration of love to Damiel, the incarnated Damiel, towards the end of the movie. I mean, passages like that are just crazy well written, and also the famous ending part where you're getting the angel Damiel's thoughts as he's watching Marianne do her trapeze work or her acrobatic work, and like just one of the greatest lines in any film I've ever heard. Ich weiß jetzt, was kein Engel weiß. I know now what no angel knows. As he's looking up at her. I think that's the last words of the film.
Yeah, and that transposition where now he's on the earth and she's
He's
up in
below.
the sky, right?
Yeah, he's
I love
watching
that.
her twirl on the rope very high up. Yeah. And there's moments in the Duino elegies actually where that inversion is going on too. But yeah, it was incredibly well written. I mean, it's just the movie is just poetry from start to finish. And yeah, you don't get that very often, regardless of what. But it's interesting to me that all of us talk about being in a kind of state of desolation or confusion when we first encountered this film, and there's something about it, even though it's in many ways I mean, the aesthetic of the film. So it's black and white until the incarnation of the angel, until he plummets down to earth and becomes a man. And then it's in color, I believe, right?
Well, there's a couple of bits where it switches, like in the circus, right?
I think it's black and white when it's being viewed through either Damiel or Cassiel's eyes, and it becomes color when it's viewed more through a human character's eyes.
Right. But once he becomes incarnated, I think it's almost all color.
But that first moment where it switches to color, I remember I was kind of stunned in the theater.
Yeah.
He buys
that jacket in the shop that's just like
no, when she's on the trapeze and they're rehearsing. And she's telling them she can't fly with these chicken wings on, right? Yeah.
Great line.
And it just switches, and I remember the whole theater gasped.
Yeah.
Right. Because I mean the cinematography, the black and white cinematography, you have to mention Henri Lecan, right? Who was the cinematographer for Jean Cocteau and Beauty and the Beast, which is one of the most beautiful films ever made. And here he was, and in fact, in the documentary, Wenders talks about when the cinema, when that Lecan had a filter he made that was made from his and he was 80 something at the time. He came out of retirement to do this. He was in his 80s, maybe 85, and he had a filter that he made from his grandmother's silk stocking,
oh my goodness,
that he had used all through his career. That they had to be so careful to put it in front of the camera. They had to tape it because it wouldn't fit on anything using modern cameras. And you can tell, I mean, just the beauty of the lighting and of the black and white. It's, you can't, it's not something that's easily captured. Right.
Yeah, it's a gross urban. So one of the most amazing things about this film that I love the most, and I think this actually also must have been part of my initial perception of it, is it takes what many people would ordinarily describe as a kind of not aesthetically appealing urban environment. There's all these shots of the wall and like the U-Bahn and stuff. Like it's just it's Berlin, and it's like some of the glorious parts of Berlin, but also a ton of like less glorious. And it transfigures this city. It's a movie very much about Berlin and the fact that it's the Cold War and the city is still divided. And of course, it's filmed entirely on the Western side, and is hugely significant to the themes of the film. Angel or incorporeal versus corporeal, these divisions and whatnot. But just the aesthetics of it were amazing. And I was living in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati is a place that many people would say is not very attractive, or at least some people do, and not least of them Cincinnatians. But it's actually this gorgeous, beautiful city in these hills, but it is sort of run down and ruined in a lot of places. It's this old, beat up American industrial city. And I, at that time, spent a heck of a lot of my free time wandering around the city, just taking these epic walks all around Cincinnati, through places that no one would ever normally just like walk for leisure. That being a flaneur. So being a flaneur in a city that has a lot of beauty and charm, but is also sort of quasi ruined, whether by war in the case of Berlin, or just American post-industrial culture, is that kind of perspective that you can have on a city is I think well captured in the film. It's got a a particular urban aesthetic.
And I think it's important that you mention, because a lot of people, when I saw it, when Daniel saw it, this is before the wall fell.
Yeah.
Right.
We saw it, so not only was it filmed, but it was only about a year and a half before the wall fell, but it was before the wall fell. And interesting in that film, and in a similar film, I think you guys are familiar with it, Hans Jürgens von Cyberberg's Parsifal. He filmed the whole opera, and both that came out in '82, so a few years before this film. But both of them are kind of contending with the Nazi past of the German people. I mean, it's still haunting them, which and it haunted. I mean, Daniel and I can both attest to this. It was something that was just part of my childhood. The ghost of World War II.
Yeah, mine too.
Even more than Vietnam, which was actually going on when I was a little kid. But World War II haunted us. We still had Holocaust survivors in the neighborhood, right? I knew people who had tattoos from the Holocaust still, and so it was an interesting attempt at acknowledging the sins of Germany and trying to enact a kind of catharsis. I think this is part of what Wenders was doing, right?
Yeah. I think what Jonathan, you were saying about the city, well, I think for a moment of William Carlos Williams' Patterson.
Yeah.
The man is the city. Another poet of a Patterson is by no means a glorious place. It's also kind of run down and so forth. But the city and its condition is also a metaphor for the human condition at that point in time, especially as Michael was saying, in the aftermath of World War II, when you look at what humanity can be, and of course the film begins with Damiel. I think he's on the Gedächtniskirche, the Church of Memory, which has been ruined in the war, and you see him on the jagged, broken portion of the church there, which in Gedächtniskirche means the Church of Memory. So the whole film is framed with that initial question about the ruination of religion, of belief, of structure, and of humanity, and that's where the angel's looking down from. That point.
And he's in what's the official script name for the old man who's in the library? Did they just call him Homer in the
or the archangel of storytelling? They call him that too.
Yeah, well, he's not clear. Like he's just wandering around in the library and he's reading all kinds of different things, and he's thinking to himself, though, I guess. I mean, this is how I interpret it anyway.
And notice, hold it before you go. Notice when he's looking at that, there's a book he's looking at a bunch of photographs, right?
Yep.
He's reading it from the back to the front.
Yeah.
And it's not written in Hebrew. Even though one of the people in the library is actually, you can hear his thoughts, you can hear him say the opening lines of Genesis in Hebrew, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know what it's the angel of history. It's the Benjamin's angel of history.
Yeah.
I don't know what, but he's has this really interesting moment in the film. He's an odd character to me in terms of the whole narrative because he drops away, but he sort of sets a kind of tone, his appearance early in the film, and he's talking about, we have these incredible, compelling stories, these great epics, but they're all about war. They're tied into war somehow, and he says, "Who will sing the epic of peace?" or something like that.
Right.
Yes.
And
Phenomenal line, phenomenal idea.
yeah. And it's like he's looking in the library for the materials that this epic might be made from, and he's not finding it, or anyhow, no one's found it yet there. Even though the library is full of all kinds of people, and then it's the whole film sort of stands as an answer to that question. It ends up being, well, you want the epic of peace? It's the epic story of man and woman coming together at the end. And that's sort of, or at least where it starts. It's a wonderful, there's a line that Kierkegaard has in a couple of places, and at least one of which I think is in propria persona and not one of his pseudonyms, where he says that all the stories end at marriage, where they should begin. That's where they should start, which has always reminded me a little bit of that. The line in Wings of Desire, where's the epic of peace? We have the epics of war, and we need those too, actually, but where's the one of peace? I feel like the epic of marriage is the answer to that desire, that need.
Well, it's all of Shakespeare's comedy is all in with the wedding, right?
Yeah.
And so
that's what comedy is. Yeah, I mean, that's what they do, and that's fine. It's great. The quest to get up to the moment of the marriage, the union of the male and the female, the hero and heroine, is great. It is an archetypal, essential story,
body and spirit, right?
But there's then, another story to be told. Every story ends by implying the next one, and that's what
how this one ends, right?
Yeah, this one ends sort of that way too, maybe, but with a very strong feeling of like, well, it's going to proceed now, instead of, great, it's done, we got the thing done, story's over. That at least I get at the end there, where Damien's looking at Marion, and I get this strong sense of the film has got us up to the moment where now the story can start. This is what had to happen in order for the story to be possible, but now it's really going to happen. I'm not sure exactly why I get that feeling so strongly from the end. Maybe you guys could speak to it, but I think that's always been my impression.
She has that line, now things become serious. Yes.
Yeah.
Zion,
right.
And the whole film is a quest for authenticity, for a sense of reality, and therefore meaning, in what looks like a pretty meaningless world. And that is going to be linked to the question of which is dealt with somewhat in the sequel, is, yes, now that they are together, are in a union, physically and emotionally, well, what's burst from that, and what's the course of that unfoldment, and what does that bring? And that looks towards, the future, or the next film. But one point I wanted to raise that I think is pretty basic to the film. Obviously, the angels are central, but the whole relationship between the transcendent and the mundane is obviously central to the film. And it's interesting that I think in certain ways, I mean, to me, there are two basic pivots or central motifs in the film. One is the relationship between the angelic and the human, the divine and the human, and the other is the relationship of man and woman. And I think they're actually handled very differently in the elegies on the one hand, and the Wender's film on the other. They're closely kin, but in a certain respect, you could say that the treatment of those themes is somewhat opposite, in that when I'm, speaking of the elegies in particular, which I think is probably the Rilke work that is most closely related to the film. Because in Rilke, you get a sense of the banality of the ordinary, and the emptiness of existence that's just the interpreted world, the gedeuteten Welt, the everyday world. Ultimately, the poem moves toward a redemption of that, of seeing the brilliance and beauty in things themselves once they are poetically named, which is the mission of the poet. And of course, naming and bearing witness is profoundly important in the Wender's film as well. But Rilke starts from this point of an emptiness, and of the mundane, at the same time that he's very wary about any premature transcendence, if you will, like the human being slipping out of their skin and having a relationship to the spiritual world, skipping over embodied reality. And so there's that moment in the elegies where he puts up his, there's a figure of Rilke warding the angel off. And of course, the angel, the very beginning lines that we quoted, every angel is terrible. There's this sense of the sublime power which can be so destructive of the transcendent, of God or the angel, and the human has to be protected from that in Rilke to develop its own identity without being crushed or devastated by the divine. Whereas in the Wenders, so there is kind of a movement towards both a protection from transcendence, but also a desire for it in the Rilke in elegies. Whereas in Wings of Desire, we have this, we begin with the angels, right? The transcendent consciousness of what is eternal, and beyond time. And the vector is towards, well, that coming into embodied being, and the glory of that. So in a way, they're two sides of the same coin, but they're coming at it from different starting points.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in a way, the embodied becomes the transcendent.
Yes,
that's the take home for me, anyway. That's why I went home that day, straight for the coffee, right?
Yes.
I went to it, and I think it really changed. I mean, it changed my perspective about everything that day. I realized I was living like a ghost, and I needed to live an embodied existence.
Yeah.
The character who's essential for that in the film, I think, is a fascinating character. Is the guy played by Peter Falk? Well, he's playing himself, Peter Falk.
Yeah.
Because he is the only one who's conscious of and even able to communicate a little with the angels. He is himself a former angel, right? I think that's the idea.
And the question is if we are not all.
Right. Right. But he has this
Right.
wonderful line where he's on the set of whatever thing he's supposed to be shooting. He's an actor, playing himself. And by the way, I totally believe Peter Falk is an ex-angel. One of my favorite actors ever. But he's sitting there and he's like drinking his coffee like he's always doing, or smoking, or both, which he advises doing together. And admittedly, it's awesome. And he's like, I wish you could be here now. I wish you could be with me now, or something like that. Because he can sense sort of still the presence of the angels when they hang around.
And he puts his hand out, right?
Yeah.
It's
Such a beautiful moment. And it's an invitation. So it's like in the film, the direction is from heavenward, or from the heavens earthward. And in the elegies, maybe, it's more about rising up or trying to find the point of encounter, the safe, responsible, mature point of encounter. But that direction, yeah, that moment where he invites when I first saw it, I don't think pick up on the idea of like, oh well, Peter Falk's a former angel himself. But I mean, it's pretty obvious if you think about it. He knows too much. But as a character, it's just fascinating that he is successfully occupying the middle ground there. He is the characterization of that thing that Rilke is striving for in the yearning for in the elegies. Not Damiel, who he becomes a human, but he's like still figuring it out. He's not really a pro at it yet. It's that odd little Peter Falk character who actually is that most Rilkean combination, I guess.
Right.
And Peter Falk's his desire to he's not going to help he's not going to help Damien rush it along too much, right? And just a little background for me is Jonathan saw it in 2003 in the spring. I saw it in the spring of 2023, namely yesterday. But the one thing, I'd heard of it, but the one thing that I kind of have in common, and I wasn't going through kind of a personal life crisis yesterday that I'm aware of, but there's a theme, when we talk about kind of those up and down movements, there's a theme that's in culture today. When I watched it, honestly, yesterday, I wondered, I didn't think it had been done before, but I finished the movie and I'm wondering, hasn't this been done before? And I kept on searching in myself. And what I kept on hearing was, and this goes back to a time where maybe I was in a crisis. It would be the idea of becoming fully human. Yeah. So one example of that, and I'm not putting it on the same aesthetic level, but Stephen Sondheim plays with that theme a lot in songs like, being alive, somebody pulled me up short, somebody forced me to care. I'm kind of living like a zombie and becoming alive. So I thought of like the angels becoming human. Every young person today is obsessed with zombie movies. And that theme of becoming alive is one that, it's another trajectory, a very, to me, kind of a similar story with that. And at that point, when I needed that, when I was feeling low, I could say, I wanted to live at maximum vitality. Mm-hmm. And, I think all these themes kind of weave together, but I also wonder, you guys might know more. Had that theme, I just explained how there was a strong resonance in me from the theme of taking on embodiment of an angel wanting to have his heart broken. When I noticed too, when I was looking at some of the quotes after watching it yesterday, like the 17 best quotes, right before he takes, quote unquote, the plunge, there's these lines about to be in her arms, for her to be in my arms. Mm-hmm. That didn't make it. The line in any website I went to, because I was trying to find all those words again without going back through. And then also for the Rilke scholars here, in the subtitles, which Jonathan struggles with a little bit, we know when Rilke, he's going to make a distinction, at least in the English translations, the idea of love, protecting the solitude of another. In my work in theology, we're always talking about how the worst is the corruption of the best. The crowd is the corruption of community. Hope is a corruption of, optimism is a corruption of hope. And when I read Rilke, and working with young people, I tend to try to make a distinction, and having worked over at a monastery, between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness and solitude. And yet in that kind of penultimate closing scene in the bar outside of the Nick Cage concert, she's saying, you make me feel lonely. I wondered if you guys who know more about the German language than I and about Rilke, if you weaved any insights into that. But this, there's a movie now, the American one, A Man Called Otto. I haven't seen it, but I've seen the Norwegian one. And when my kids were watching it, all I can say is like, this is the only story about a man who's living, his wife had died, again, a broken heart, like you said, Daniel. And then this Iranian lady in the original Norwegian movie, based on a novel, kind of upsets his life and kind of he's trying to kill himself unsuccessfully and draws him back into life. But maybe a little bit about loneliness and solitude. Is that a relevant thing
before you
in
go
the ending
there,
of this movie?
Before you go there, Now, you pointed to something we haven't really touched on is when the film starts and we hear the inner monologues of different people, right? They're almost uniformly, about anxiety and, and fear. And it's really, it's, we're, in fact, what happens is we, the audience, we actually participate in the point of view of the angels, which is one of the beautiful things about it. We have the same omniscience that the angels have about all these other people, and we see it through the angels. But they're so sad, but even one of the interesting moments, I think one of my favorite moments in the film is the motorcycle accident, where
Yeah.
first
Mhm.
begins with the guy who's dying says, "Haven't you ever seen anybody croak before?" And then Daniel comes back and comforts him, and you hear this kind of um, spontaneous free association about just these images, and they're all just extraordinary, right? Like the color of stones and water, Easter, bread and wine. I mean, all these things that my mother, my father, my wife, my child. Just it's extraordinary, and it goes from the sublime to the ridiculous. Stromboli shows up in there, right? But
Mhm.
it's beautiful, and it's in a way it's a almost a kind of a transition moment in the film because in death, in this guy's death, you see the transcendent come into there, which is might be one of the only times until at that point in the film where the inner monologues of people we've heard have hopefulness to them, and then it kind of changes.
I think
The
that's
mood of the film changes after that.
yeah, I think that's a key point, a really fundamental point, is that yes, there is a call to awakening to life, but the portal to that is death. They're both really dealing with what in a kind of classic religious context would be called initiation. An initiation. You don't just jump out of your skin into the spirit, right? There has to be a death of the ego in some way, shape, or form. Some kind of death of the ordinary self or consciousness in order to contact without utter destruction, the the transcendent that is always there, right? And part, what when you were saying, Michael, about hearing people's thoughts, what we're introduced to there is the fact that yes, the thoughts are sad and full of anxiety, and everybody's in their own thought cubicle, right? There's total isolation from others. That's the kind of human landscape. And that's why the coming together of Damiel and Marion is so epical and so cataclysmic, because it's a breaking of that barrier of not solitude, but loneliness. I think, Mike, you're right that the difference between those two is actually is essential, and there's a tremendous difference between being confined in a bubble without finding access to the world or to others, which is where we encounter, many persons in the film, and which is epitomized by the suicide. The guy who jumps off the top of the building, which gives Cassiel tries to comfort him, but of course he doesn't quite manage that, and is devastated when this man.
His body language there is so powerful, right?
Yeah.
More than the scream, the way he collapses,
Yeah. And so the step from you know ordinary consciousness to that awakening is a not an easy one, and in some way you have to pass through death, you have to pass through despair, you have to pass through loneliness, to get to the point. At the end of the film, I think Marion says, Yeah, the togetherness with Damiel is premised upon their each having their own solitude as well, which is a quintessentially Rilkean theme,
Yeah.
right? Being the
Mhm.
guardian of one another's solitude.
And how she put it, at last I would find someone I could be alone with.
Yes.
Great Leonard Cohen lyrics in the song "Waiting for a Miracle." You know, baby, let's get married. We've been alone too long. Let's
Mhm.
be alone together. Let's see if we're strong. Um, I think that album's from like 92 or something. It's actually from right around the time of the film. But so I have to say that sometimes Rilke can feel like there's too much of an emphasis on that that aloneness, even in company. I struggle to understand how that that idea doesn't how it can be squared with genuine communion between people, and how it might I struggle to see how it does not inevitably lead to exactly the sort of hyper individualism, the atomization of individual consciousness that, yeah, Wings of Desire is certainly showing us that, particularly in the first part of the film. And the question seems to be, how can you overcome that? And to me, the answer of, well, you'll be alone still but together is not adequate. And I don't think that that's what I got from the end of Wings of Desire either, because the way that they the way that Damiel and Marianne are with each other at the end seems to be so the film seems to be trying to show it to us in a way that is very focused on their bodies and their places where they are, and what I don't get much of a sense of they're alone together at the end. They seem more genuinely or thoroughly together than that. I mean, maybe I just am never been a sensitive enough reader of that kind of language that you guys have pointed out, but I have to say it strikes
I
me
think
as
it's
a bit
kind of
odd.
there. I think it's kind of there, Jonathan, and tell me if you disagree, Michael or Daniel. Um, it's there kind of in the Trinitarian anthropology, not to take it too far afield, is that, again, I'm always going back to working with young people. Right now, the loneliness epidemic, they want to hurl together themselves into kind of a uniform mass. And I'm just like I said, loneliness and solitude, optimism and hope. The distinction between a community and a crowd is so profound, like universes apart.
Yeah.
So a language the students always feed back to me is, and they talk about bodily gestures. They're coming in here and they're talking about a relationship they have. And what usually comes out of me is like two sparrows in a hurricane. Yuck, yuck, yuck. That until you can be fundamentally your own person and in communion, that oneness. So, not the oneness of the womb, but we go through this death, as Daniel makes clear. And then this idea that we, through a form of death, we do find solitude, and not paradoxically, but it's a both and. This is the whole Trinitarian dealio, that instead of going back to the womb as a goal of, you mentioned the translations you had, some of the Eastern religions kind of going back to oceanic oneness. But this idea that the more Jonathan becomes Jonathan, he finds a unity that is womb-like, as well as your total personhood at the same time. I think we're still getting there. If some of us believe in the evolution of consciousness, that's what Barfield would call final participation, that a oneness restored at a higher level without reducing anything. But certainly in this culture, with after the Industrial Revolution, the emphasis is all towards this kind of homogeneous mass. and working in church ministries, preparing people for marriage, I always want to tease people apart more and more. So, hyperbole, as Leon Bloy said, is, that thing that draws us closer to insects, distinguishes between insects and draws us closer to the stars. That we almost need some hyperbole here to do some really important work in culture. And it's kind of untangling people apart, without some of this language that Wenders is using in Rilke. I'm out of luck trying to get people to see the distinction between their way out of loneliness is going to a Bills game and wearing the stuff,
Well,
crowd
I
phenomenon.
think there's a key word at the end of the film that for me is how it works. Erstaunen. Damiel's looking at Marianne and he says he's astounded by her. He wonders at her.
That's a sense of otherness, yeah.
Well,
that she
I don't,
right?
Yeah, otherness, I guess, but it's more. The wonder isn't at the fact of the otherness, because he's become a human being now. She's no longer other to him in the way that she was when he first fell in love with her as an angel, when he was still an angel. And no, but he's just wondering at her as this woman. And I think you cannot have that feeling in a non-personal way, in an impersonal way. You only feel wonder before something that you actually engage with as personality, as a person. So if you feel wonder before the natural world, say, it's because you actually experience the creation as person, not as matter, which is alien to you as a conscious being, as inert unconscious matter. You experience it as another kind of person. So I think maybe my objections to the language of aloneness don't really stand up, but in terms of how you get over that, how you try to actually describe, well, what is it like to be alone together? I think one way of explaining what that bond is, what the communion rests in, is this constant wonder. And certainly that could be Trinitarian for sure. But in the film, that's the word that has jumped out at me since I first heard it.
Like, it reminds me of, I think maybe what the film's saying is the answer to that anxiety, angst, and despair that haunts so much of the film, and especially in the beginning, is finding a way to enter into a radical astonishment or a radical amazement as the pure authenticity of being human, right? And I always tell the story to students when they ask me for a rubric. I hate that. Yeah, my rubric is always astonish me, right? Which is something Lacan's friend Jean Cocteau, right here, heard from Serge Diaghilev, right? When he hired Cocteau to design sets for The Rite of Spring. He said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" Astonish me. That's what I want you to do, right? And the film is really good at astonishing us at various points, right? We talked about the transition to color, but there are many of those, or the part with Peter Falk when we find out he's an angel and I feel you, I can feel you. I know you're here since I got here, right? And I think what's interesting in the film is how it uses humor very often to bring us into that astonishment, to disarm us. Like when Marion is talking to Peter Falk and she's looking for, are you looking for somebody? He goes, "Lieutenant, can you help me find someone?" No. Really? Well, do you know his name? No. Do you know where he lives? No. Do you know what he looks like? That's a tough case.
Yeah.
There's so many of those moments, even at the beginning, right? When the Song of Childhood starts, and it's very serious, very German, and then it said, "and didn't make faces when being photographed," right? So there's a lightness that comes in to rescue us from that darkness, and for me, the absolute affirmation of the love between man and woman, which talk about otherness, right? I would tell when I was a Waldorf teacher, and the boys in around 6th grade they would try to tease the girls in the way that they tease other boys, and the girls would just break down. "Are you teasing me?" And so I had to have a meeting with the boys. I said, all right, get this, boys. They are not like us. They are not like us. And in fact, I was thinking yesterday about Tiresias, right? Who was the only human who ever to have experienced both male and female psyche, because he was actually biologically both male and female at different times. And that's an important thing here in this film. Is there's such a it from, I mean, being married for now 30 years, 31 years, that affirmation of marriage, you know, that
It's amazing.
revelation.
You could never hear this line in any language in modern film. Es gibt keine größere Geschichte als die von uns beiden, von Mann und Frau. There's no greater story than that of us two, the man and the woman. That's what John says in her Lebenserklärung, and it's.
Wait, John. The DEI representative's at the door right now. Later.
No, it's so subversive. It's so subversive.
It's crazy. She says that, and it's just, I mean, when I was astonished even in 2003. It's, I mean, things were nowhere near like they are now, but it still felt archaic, an affirmation of something archaic and primordial even, to hear that. And the instant response of that I had then, and still do anytime I see this thing, was, that's completely true. I give my total assent to that statement. She's absolutely right. And you're right. And it is a kind of wonder at it, that's the story, that like that's the story, the original story. So I mean, yeah, that is another part of how it works. I don't know how to map that onto the divine human or mundane transcendent kind of spectrum, or whatever you want to call it, that the movie is working with. And it's even weirder in Rilke. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to try that there, but one does want there to be some kind of connection between those two pairs, man and woman, and let's just say heaven and earth.
Yeah, well, I think that's, I could try a few thoughts on that. First of all, I think this harkens back to something you mentioned before, Jonathan, about Rilke on loneliness and your questions about that. I mentioned before how the film and Rilke seem to come from somewhat different perspectives, not unrelated, but somewhat different in terms of the angel, human, transcendent, mundane angle of things. Well, I think the same is true with regard to love, the relationship between a man and a woman, because much of the elegies and certainly much of Rilke's life is characterized by a tremendous yearning for love and connection with the unknown beloved, the feminine other, but also a profound, putting off of that, and I mean, you know, he married Clara, but then they split, and you know, he had many loves thereafter, but he could never maintain himself in a married relationship or a singular relationship. And you find that in the elegies too, where the emphasis is on the possibility of being entangled in another in a way that reduces one, right? You get lost in an enmeshment that somehow precludes transcendence for Rilke. And at the same time, the yearning that's part of love is the very motor of transcendence for him. So it's a dialectic there. And I think what's key is that when you talk about this being the story, you're talking about an archetypal level of reality. And I think that's what both the film and Rilke are looking for. And that's true with the man-woman relationship, that the relationship between Damiel and Marion becomes so profound because somehow the film succeeds in touching an archetypal level where it's not just Damiel and Marianne, it is somehow man and woman. It's actually masculine and feminine, the archetypal energies represented by those. And it is only, all the alchemical texts say, that the path to the self, the divine in the human, is the union of the king and the queen, the masculine and the feminine in each individual, as well as it being, a product of actual relationship. But that's what to me is so challenging about gender politics today, is the loss of that, any kind of connection to that transcendent level, which is actually what provides numinosity or the connection to the divine.
I gave you that quote one time, Michael, that Father Ed Dillon, who we had on the podcast, when he studied over in Rome at the highest levels, his favorite professor had the line, "No civilization has survived 3 generations of co-education," meaning once that polarity is gone, civilization falls apart. But this came from a historical perspective, that no civilization has survived 3 generations of co-education. When you mash up the gender so much, what you get in the language Michael Martin uses a lot is the confusion of the creative and the clever. It's just a rearranging of the parts. The creative is gone. And then civilizations start to crumble down because there's nothing new. There's no huge flames. And I've mentioned too that the monastery I used to work, they're seeing a crisis, and they're Trappist monks. But one of their heavy hitters now, not quite the Thomas Merton of our age, Michael Casey, he's an Australian Trappist monk. He's had to posit out of a fight for survival that a Trappistine monastery must necessarily be located somewhere near a Trappist monastery. So there's some type of arcing, because without that, you see the life of the men shrivels up. These are realities that, we're finding, I think, experimentally true.
Interesting. Just yesterday, or even this morning, I was watching a lecture from a couple of years ago with Camille Paglia. Just happened to show up, and she was talking about precisely this. She said, this idea of men and women interchanging and doing the same jobs, working side by side, it's an experiment. This is still in the experimental stage. And she talked about when she was a girl in New York, in an Italian immigrant community where the worlds of men and women at the time were different worlds, right? And that we shouldn't ignore that what we've been doing for the last few generations, last 2 or 3 generations, is an experiment that has never been tried before, right? So
it's true. I'd say we're up to about 3 generations now.
We're up to about what, Jonathan?
We're at least up to about 3 generations now in terms of co-education. And it's hard for me to, I don't know. It's hard for me, born in 1982, to, so here's an interesting personal anecdote. When I was 14, end of middle school, 8th grade, I was miserable, absolutely miserable in the school system that I was a part of, which was a supposedly good, and it was good, public school system. And my best friend was next door to me, and his family was Catholic. I grew up with no religious upbringing. My parents, my friend had been in public school with me up to that point, because his parents couldn't afford to send their kids all through Catholic school, all the way through their whole educations. But they thought the best time for it was in high school, because we had this very prestigious Jesuit high school there, St. Xavier's High School. And they thought, if that's the time to do it, if you can. And so they were going to send my friend Greg there. It was all boys. And all the Catholic schools in Cincinnati, at least back then, were still hadn't been integrated. There were no co-ed ones that I'm aware of. I now realize that's probably weird. I mean, this is the 90s I'm talking about. I think by then a lot of them had been integrated. But anyway, my friend was going to go, and my parents said, "Well, do you want to go too? You know, we're like half Jewish and don't do anything with religion, but we'll send you to the Jesuit school. It's great academically. Your best friend's going to go." And a huge part of me really wanted to do it because I thought, well, yeah, gosh, I mean, this looks great. I was a serious kid. I was a serious student. I wanted to be around other people who actually wanted to learn. And my best friend was going there, and it just, everything about it seemed like, why would I not do it? You know, I mean, this could be great. And I wasn't particularly weirded out by the religion of it. I in fact, if anything, it might have been a kind of a draw because it was something I didn't have. You know, it was strange and mysterious and other to me. And but I decided not to, which ended my friendship with this guy because I wanted. There's like this overwhelming animal impulse. Like, no, I want to be around the girls. It was clear as day to me then, and it's been clear ever since. Like, there was only really one reason I decided to stay in public school, was I wanted to be around the girls. And you know, it's impossible to genuinely regret the course of one's life. It's kind of irrational to do that, but so I don't. And I've had a very interesting youth because of that decision, which in fact led me up to the point where I could watch Wings of Desire for the first time at the age of about 21, in the particular emotional state I was in.
Right.
And I think I would have led a very, very different life if I had gone to the unisex Jesuit boys' school. But that was, I mean, it was so apparent to me that difference between the schools was the difference. One was all boys and one was not. You know, all the academic stuff, all my distaste for the drugged out anti-intellectual culture of suburban American kids in the 90s, all that other stuff was way downstream from the primary difference between these schools, which was one is co-ed and one is not. And so, I mean, that's, yeah, the consciousness of that difference it makes in one's entire relation to the world, consciousness of the sort of cosmic masculine and feminine, how they instantiate and play out, is just it's impossible to overstate how important that is.
So why don't we
and in view
start
of
to wind it down a little bit?
Sorry, huge anecdote. I don't know.
We're running.
It's related. It is somehow responsible for how I ended up watching Wings of Desire as I did.
So any last thoughts? Any last thoughts, Daniel?
Yeah, well, just picking up on what Jonathan was saying is I think it's worth noting what a remarkable character Marion is. And because she really does carry the soul. I mean, she's a soul figure. She's an anima figure, a profoundly deep one. And that is, of course, why the angel Damiel, who's masculine, figured as masculine, is so drawn to her. There's that wonderful moment when she's alone in her trailer there. I don't know if he's there too, but he's not incarnated yet, so she doesn't know he's there, where she has that stone. Or does he pick up the stone?
Picks up the stone.
He picks up the stone, which is a symbol of the weight or gravity of earthly existence. And she's wondering in astonishment about the simple, the simplest things, which, I think of the famous lines from Rilke's Ninth Elegy. Are we here perhaps? Are we perhaps here just for saying house, bridge, fountain, gate, jug, olive tree, window, but for saying, remember, for such saying as never the things themselves hope so intensely to be. Not a great translation there, but this numinosity of, earthly existence, which is carried by her, which she carries in a way in her being, at the same time that she's a trapeze artist.
Mhm.
And of course, there's the wonderful fifth elegy where Rilke talks about the circus and it being the archetype of the human who is trying to transcend, trying to fly, but she just has chicken wings, before she meets Daniel. She can't quite do that and is always in danger of falling, but is nevertheless yearning for, for that. So, yeah, there's this tremendous coming together, talk about, Trinitarian anthropology or whatever, of, body, soul, and spirit that is illustrated or unfolded in some way in the film. And I think that's why it is such a profoundly moving experience for so many persons, because there is a figuration of that in the images, in the story of, and what is more healing, what is more necessary, what is more central to our being than finding some harmony of body, soul, and spirit, because that's the answer, to the human quest for meaning and the divine. And I think the film, and Rilke's whole oeuvre, in a way, is really addressing and speaking to that deep need in a very profound way.
Tell us about your books, Daniel. And then Jonathan, we're going to have you reintroduce your books.
Well,
Dan,
I
very briefly, I want to tell the story that Michael, we'd had correspondence about Daniel and Jonathan coming on. I'd met Jonathan, and Daniel to me was some professor who wrote a book on Rilke. So I said, I better get up to snuff. And I remembered reading a book on Rilke some years ago after just being engrossed in the Sonnets to Orpheus. And so I thought I'm going to go back to that one. I had it on Kindle because I thought it was just amazing. And it happened to be Daniel's book.
Yeah. So that's this book. It's called In the Image of Orpheus.
It's great. It's great.
A Soul History. This took about 20 years of my life, and it kind of goes through the whole of Rilke's life and work from a perspective of archetypal psychology, deals with a lot of the things that we're talking about today. I have a couple others too. My first, this one's called Rue Rilke, which is my story of my first Rilke pilgrimage when I went in not long after seeing the Wim Wenders. This is in 1993. I took a trip to France and Switzerland and visited sites important to Rilke. At the same time, I was involved in anti-death penalty work. So these are both with Chiron publications. So this is a kind of travelogue and the account of my Rilke pilgrimage. And then the one Michael Martin helped me with is my translation to the Sonnets to Orpheus, which is out from Angelico Press, and is one of the relatively few translations of the sonnets that strives to maintain the meter and the music and the rhyme of the sonnets while remaining faithful to the Rilkean word. So
Let me say this.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah.
Here's something not many people know. So I never charged Angelico Press for editing that book.
Wow.
Because I felt like it'd be a violation. So John Reese and Jim Wetmore, I never told you, but now I'm telling you because I know you're gonna watch this because you have 3 Angelico authors here, and I never charged you guys.
Oh, well.
Because I felt
That's an honor.
I don't want to pollute Rilke with filthy lucre. You know what I mean? I didn't want to. It was an honor to do that.
Yeah.
Jonathan, repitch your great novel.
I've got sure. But first, let me say that your work sounds wonderful, Daniel, and I frequently teach with Rilke, but I haven't read your translation of Sonnets to Orpheus, so I'm definitely going to check that out and hopefully get a chance to teach with it, because that sounds wonderful.
Where are you teaching now?
I teach creative writing at Eastern Michigan University. Occasionally, I'm an adjunct. I sort of pick up classes when I'm there. I teach creative writing, so I'm trying to actually get people to write. I'm not teaching literature courses.
Right.
Yeah, I love to try and use some Rilke when I do usually the poetry parts, but I haven't been thrilled with Rilke translations. Stephen Mitchell, whose translation I read when we started the program, is the only one I've ever read of Rilke. And Mitchell was an interesting guy and a great guy, and it's got its limitations. So anyway, I'm glad to learn.
Buddhist Rilke. That's what we get Buddhist Rilke with Stephen.
Buddhist. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's very Zen and into Taoism, which actually has, of all the Eastern religions that I know of, the most attention is paid to masculine and feminine ideas, principles in it, and that comes out in all kinds of interesting ways. And in Stephen Mitchell's stuff too. But you're right, it's Buddhist Rilke. Right. So what did I write? I haven't written as much. I do have a publication, a translation of Paul Claudel's 5 Great Odes from Angelico, Claudel, which were written actually not long at all before Rilke's poetry, sort of early modernist or even high modernist period of time in literary history, and maybe really do have something in common with Rilke. I actually first discovered Rilke through reading his French poetry when I was an undergrad, but I also have a novel. I do have a copy of that next to me. You can see
Absolute Music.
Absolute Music, which is published by Slant Books, and yeah, in that novel, Wings of Desire features prominently at a significant moment in it, including some lines are quoted. And actually earlier, I had to use my novel to find the line in Wings of Desire that I wanted to read about the greatest story there, under Staunen. But so that's me for the moment. It's been great.
I'll definitely look forward to reading that novel.
Right. So, friends, thank you so much. Michael, we'll all see you next week. Jonathan and Daniel, thanks so much. This crew could be brought again because I learned so much, and we'll do another one. We stayed kind of Rilke, Wings of Desire. I think we need a show in the future just on Rilke himself too. So, and it would look forward to inviting you both back. And we will see everybody next week on the Regeneration Podcast. Thanks for listening.